You guys have seen that show, okay? That specific season. This stop will prove very interesting to you guys. I'm going to point your direction to this gray building on the corner right over here where all the bouquets of flowers are lining the balcony right along here. That gray building, right at the edge, okay? That is the home of the Delphine Lalaurie. That name ring a bell to anybody? Yeah, okay. Who's excited for that? Awesome, awesome, awesome. Now, in order to understand the atrocities that happened in this house, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of insight and history on the lady of the house first. She was actually born Delphine McCarty. Okay, she was heir to the McCarty plantation fortune, where they grew tobacco and cotton in upstate Louisiana. Now, at the age of 16 years old, Miss McCarty is attempted to be married out by her family to a man who was 25 years older than her. Okay. Now, after 4 years of happily wed marriage, this man dies in mysterious circumstances. Funny way to say arsenic poisoning, but you know, whatever. Now, and again, after about 4 years of marriage, this man dies in mysterious circumstances. You guys see a pattern with her, right? Not exactly something you're trying to put in your Tinder bio, you know what I mean? Now, finally at the age of 43 years old, she meets the so-called love of her life and her third husband. His name is Nicholas Lalaurie. Now, Nicholas is 20 years younger than Delphine at the time, and some would say this is Louisiana's first recorded cougar attack. Anyway, thing about young Nicholas, he has just graduated dead last in his class of medical school. Does anyone know we call someone who graduates dead last in medical school? Doctor. Not mine. A chiropractor is also acceptable. I have yet to have a chiropractor on my tour, and that's probably a good thing. So she meets young Nicholas, they marry, they wed, and they buy this gorgeous property on the corner of Orleans and Governor Nichols. Now, Delphine was extremely rich at the time. She's worth about $20 million, okay? Now keep in mind, this is the early 1800s. That is a lot of money during that time. To give you guys a little perspective, the entire Louisiana Purchase, which is from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to Canada, basically the entire Mississippi River Valley, was made for $15. She's worth $5 million more than the entire Mississippi River Valley, okay? And she's also a socialite. She's used to throwing very lavish dinner parties. We like to say she's the evil Kendall Jenner of her time, or as I just say, just Kendall Jenner. But the weird thing about her home is that any one of these other given French Quarter houses, you typically find anywhere between 7 to 10 enslaved people at the time. At Delphine's house, there were 85. Okay? And if you were to attend one of her very lavish parties, you would notice that A, there are 85 enslaved people in this property, and 2, you would never see the same enslaved person twice. And if you were to ask Delphine about it or question her, she would threaten to excommunicate you from New Orleans high society. And that was social suicide at the time, so people just kind of kept their mouths shut. But one night, she is getting her hair brushed by a young enslaved girl named Leah. She is all of 11 years old. She's brushing Delphine's long, flowing red hair, and she hit a snag. Delphine flies into a fit of rage and grabs a bull whip that she keeps on the side of her bed for this very reason and begins to viciously beat this 11-year-old girl. Okay? She beats her all the way to the balcony where you see the bouquets lining right over there, where young Leah tries to climb over the balcony to escape her wrath. However, she continues to beat her over the wrought iron balcony. Now, unfortunately, young Leah falls from the balcony onto her head to the concrete below to her death. Okay? Now, this is very important in the context of this story. The reason why is something called the Code Noir. Okay? Any history buffs know what the Code Noir is? Code Noir is an article underneath the Pollyanna Code, which New Orleans was under at the time, and it stated that any person with enslaved people underneath their ownership cannot maim, injure, or kill them. Okay? Now, that seems relatively progressive given the time period in the southern half of the United States. Okay? However, it was not, because there's a big comma at the end of that statement that says you must hire a third-party person to do so. Those people are called overseers. Now keep in mind, the Code Noir was not there to protect any enslaved person. It was merely there to protect the institution of slavery and increase profitability. There was no compassion while drafting this article, just making that fully clear. Now, as I said, Delphine has just blatantly broken the Code Noir, okay? And there is no getting around the fact that she committed this act. Neighbors have seen it, people walking down the street have seen it. Like, there's several witnesses, right? Does anyone take a wild guess what her punishment is for breaking the Code Noir? she received a $300 fine. That is what the city of New Orleans valued the life of this little girl at. And not only that, she could not have been bothered to go to the courthouse and even pay the fine herself. She actually sent Leah's mother to pay the fine on her behalf. And not only that, when Leah's mother returns to the property, overpaying the fine over the head of her dead daughter, Delphine hands her a shovel and says, "Please get your trash out of my courtyard." Despicable works. Now, the night that really put Delphine Lalaurie into the history books is the night of April 10th, 1834. She's in the middle of throwing one of her very lavish parties, and a fire erupts in her home, specifically the kitchen. Okay. Firefighters respond, they go into the kitchen, they put out the blaze. It's a relatively small fire, they caught it pretty quickly. What they find is a 75-year-old enslaved woman who has been chained to the stove. Okay? She is miraculously unharmed. She has escaped the blaze by any means. And the firefighters try to get a statement from her. They say, "Ma'am, what happened?" She says, "Anywhere that I can reach on this chain of mine, I set fire to it. I set fire to this table, this crawl space, this stove right here. I would rather burn alive in this kitchen to death and take this damn building with me than ever go back upstairs again." Now, what she's referring to is the structure on top of the kitchen, which would have been the enslaved people's quarters at the time. Naturally, this piques the firefighters' interest. Okay, they go get young Nicholas, Delphine's new husband, and they tell him, "Look, we want to check out your enslaved people's quarters. We want to see what's going on. We want to see why she's saying what she's saying." Nicholas tells the firefighters, "What's behind these doors of the enslaved people's quarters are the affairs of my wife, and my wife alone," effectively throwing her under the bus, which we should have. Now, they say we can do this one of two ways. Either you can be a good little boy, run downstairs and get us a key, or we will use our very sharp axes and break this door down. Nicholas says, "Okay, I'll run and grab you that key, no problem." Spoiler alert, he never comes back with it. Okay. The firefighters are forced to break the door down, and what they find inside, guys, is a literal torture chamber, something straight out of medieval times. Now, I will warn you guys, the next part of this story does contain some graphic racial violence and very dark and uncomfortable parts of American history. So if you guys would like to excuse yourself for this moment, don't want to hear it, please do so now. All right. So like I said, what they find inside is a literal torture chamber. The first thing that they see are 7 enslaved men lined up against the wall of the enslaved people's quarters. They are all wearing identical spiked collars. Now these spikes are not long enough as is to pierce their neck or their jugular, causing them to bleed out. However, they are so systematically meshed on chains that these men must stand on their tippy toes at all times, because they would go flat-footed, the spikes would then go in. Each one of these men has also had their own feces forcibly shoved in their own mouths, and their mouths sewn and muzzled shut. Okay? And as much as I would like to tell you guys this was an isolated incident of torture, it was so widely practiced at the time here that it had a name. It's called Derby's dose. Derby was the first enslaved person this happened to, and a dose was what they call a medicine for insubordination. Okay? We know about this because it was written in a diary by a man named Thomas Thistlewood, who was an overseer in a plantation in Haiti, and he left the American public this diary. Now, his diary was 37 volumes, each volume containing various forms of torture, and each worse than the last. Okay? Now, another thing that they see inside this room is a 3x3x3 wooden crate. Now, this crate is barely big enough to hold a medium-sized dog. Think beagle or corgi size. Inside this crate was an adult woman whose limbs had been broken and reset in order to fit inside this box. When they are finally from this crate, the only thing that she could do was move on the ground resembling a human crab. Okay? Another thing they find is a woman who's had her arms and legs amputated, and a ribbon-like surgical wound made in a corkscrew fashion around her face and torso. Now, this wound had been shoved with salt and tobacco that would never properly heal. It was a process called pickling. It was another excerpt of that diary that I was telling you guys about. But the most despicable and disturbing form of torture found in this room is there was a man strapped to a chair in the middle of the chambers, and half of his skull had been surgically removed. Out from an exposed lobe of his brain was a very thin iron rod. It was said that Delphine would go into this room every single day, ask this man a question, and then proceed to stir his thoughts. Okay? Like I said, she was a very despicable woman. Now, as I said, Nicholas never came back to me. What he did do during this time was he went and got Delphine and said, "Look, they're about to figure out what we've been up to here. We need to get out of Dodge." So they hop in their carriage and they go to port. They go from here to Mobile, Alabama, Mobile to New York City to Paris, France. Now in the show, American Horror Story Season 3 coming, okay, Lalaurie has a little run-in with Marie Laveau, who is the voodoo queen of New Orleans, and she curses Delphine Lalaurie to everlasting life, but then proceeds to bury her alive as an atonement for her sins against humanity, okay? Now, that is somewhat poetic justice in this scenario, somewhat poetic justice, okay? However, in the true story, while Delphine Lalaurie and Marie Laveau both lived in the same time period, and both in the French Quarter, they lived on opposite ends of the border and never really interacted. Okay? So in the true story, there is no poetic justice for these poor souls. There's no justice at all, in fact, because Delphine continues to live the rest of her life in luxury and wealth in Paris, France, until she is killed in a boar hunting accident at the ripe old age of 78. But if it makes you feel any better, she is trampled by boars. So win one for the home team, as far as I'm concerned. But, and this is where the curse comes in. This building has been several things since these atrocities. In the early 1920s, it was a boarding home for Sicilian immigrants, okay, making their way in America. I myself come from a Sicilian background, and any time that I am in the French Quarter, whether it be for a wedding, a birthday, things of that nature, I will not even stand on this side of the street, okay? That's why, in case you can't tell, if you look down the street, there are several tours going on about this property, none on this side. That is because, according to any local or anyone that knows about the property, it is considered very bad luck to cross underneath that balcony or even be on the same side of the street. So I do not do that. But like I said, in the early 1920s, it was a boarding home for Sicilian immigrants. And one night there was a husband, a wife, and a newborn baby living in one of the rooms of the property. The husband woke up at about 4 o'clock in this morning. His property, obviously Nicolas Cage is still alive, if that's what you choose to see him as. It's a curse of just genuine bad luck, but most importantly, and something that Delphine would have probably thought worse than death, financial ruin. So like I said, Nicolas Cage buys this property in 2006 for $3.8 million. He moves he and his family here, and they live inside that property for all of 3 days before they move out and buy another condo down Governor Nichols. Now keep in mind, the property is still underneath his ownership, and while it is underneath his ownership, he is arrested 6 times for drunk and disorderly on Bourbon Street. Do you guys know how hard that is? I tried. It's not easy. And not only that, but if you were to take any of our cemetery tours or even just visit any of our cemeteries, specifically St. Louis number 1, Nicolas Cage has a tomb here, and it's in the shape of a giant Masonic pyramid. It's riding that National Treasure high a little too hard still, if you ask me. But so there have been 4 recorded times in modern history of lightning striking a mausoleum here in the city of New Orleans. All 4 times was his tomb. Okay? But the curse takes the biggest hold on Nicolas Cage in the year 2009, where he has a run-in with America's biggest and scariest gangster. We call these people the Internal Revenue Service, and they just keep calling me. Anyway, they say, Nick, you've been a bad boy and haven't paid some back taxes, so we are seizing some properties from you, including this one. They seize the property from him, and it sits on auction for 2 years before it is bought by a very wealthy natural gas tycoon out of Dallas, Texas. Okay? And he's doing really well financially. And we think the reason that he's able to keep his wealth and not suffer the curse is because he is not dumb enough to live in this house. Okay? This is just his vacation. He is here for Jazz Fest, Mardi Gras, Halloween, things of that nature. And one of his favorite things to do is gift the top earners of his company a fabulous day in New Orleans in this mansion for the weekend and not tell them about the property. Very sick sense of humor. Now, as I said before, this is the final stop on our tour, and I'm going to wrap the property up with telling you guys hands down the creepiest things that have happened to me outside of this house. And I say outside because you will not catch me dead inside this building. So, this was this past January. I was giving one of these tours, and I had a lady on my tour. And again, same thing. I say it on every single one of them. It's considered very bad luck to cross on the avenue. Please don't do it, right? And up until this point, I didn't realize that I had to specify that this is a warning because this lady considers it a personal challenge. In the middle of my tour, she runs from this spot right here, underneath the balcony of the property, starts to take pictures and yell at the ghosts inside. Yeah. I don't recommend doing it. And knocks herself clean out. Wow. Yeah. It's a whole thing. I have to call paramedics. My tour is delayed by like 25 minutes. And when we finally get her to come to, We asked her what happened, and she says something chased me down the street. And we tried to ask her and describe what it was. She had no answer. She was just that much in shock. It was hard to get like 4 or 5 words out of her. A couple weeks after that, I was working the box office one night where you lovely folks went into to get your wristbands and stuff like that. And a lady calls me and says, I took one of the tours of French Quarter Phantoms and I went underneath the balcony of the Lalaurie mansion and something followed me home to Denver, Colorado. What do I do? My response was, ha ha, and click. Told you not to do it. You didn't heed the warning. That's on you, boo. And guys, feel free. At the end of the tour, if you want to go underneath that balcony, yell.
Well, I guess that's it right there, y'all.
There were reports of a guy with a fairly horrible cut injury, that there were cages involved, there were shackles involved, and one guy had a iron collar around his neck.
Oh, man.
Family friendly.
Look at the pool!
Look at the well.
That's the pool?
I don't want to go.
That's some bull.
Is that so? Where's the crazy call on the sign, man?
That must be the only one. No, that ain't them, then. That ain't them. Oh, she said make a left. Down there. Oh, yeah, you right. Hey, this should take up the whole corner. They don't take up the whole corner. You boy crazy.
Now, does somebody own this building? Yes. They don't own the building?
Lalaurie start making
I don't think he needs to own the building either. So the people need to have the right.